One of my favorite topics this time of year is seed starting. With January comes a clean slate, and it provides lots of opportunity to try new things, start new seeds, and just have a really good plan to go with on the gardening season. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to plan seed starting and how to get going with it. So a lot of people question, when do I know when to start my seeds? Well, I always try to tell people to go to that calendar and figure out what day you want to be planting them in the garden. And then you need to also figure out how many days is it going to take from the time you start that seed until it is ready to go in the garden. And so a lot of times what I find myself doing is, okay, I know I need to plant my tomatoes May 1st. And I know that it's going to take me about 6 to 8 weeks to have a plant. Plus, I need to add an extra week on for germination time. So if I know it's May 1st, I want them. So we're looking at about the second or third week of March that we would start sowing those seeds. The other thing that makes a big difference is the hardiness zone. And think about when our last average frost is. And usually, depending on where you're at in Missouri, it could be anywhere between the second week of April to the last week of April. There will be some differences. But once again, we base some seed starting based on when we're going to have that last average frost. So if we know that a plant is not frost hardy, then we will use that last average frost date and then count back on the calendar to determine a date to start the seeds. Just keep in mind that calendar is important. I usually have a separate calendar just for figuring out when I need to start my seeds. And then when I'm starting them, I also make notes on my calendars as well as on the labels when I started my plants. Allow additional time for germination always. Keep in mind that some things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower might be up in 3 days, whereas tomatoes might be up in 7 days. Peppers might be up in 21 days. So always try to allow that additional time for germination. And do your research, because every crop is different. Every seed is different on how long it's going to take to germinate, as well as how many days it's going to take before it's ready to transplant. The chart below is just an example of the information that's been given about weeks before transplanting and so on and so forth. So it's just important to do your homework and find out all the particulars of the seeds that you want to start. Think about your supplies. Right now is the time to be starting to gather your supplies. We're not quite at the point where we need to be starting seeds, but gathering supplies is a wise idea. You can start seeds in anything. Pots, you can use the peat pots and peat pellets. However, I'm not real fond of them because they tend to be cold and seeds don't tend to like them as well. You could also use cell packs, recycled materials such as yogurt cups. You could use sour cream containers, just lots of different things. Takeout meals, you can use those containers, just about anything. Top picture, I found that using toilet paper rolls. Another one would be egg cartons. So you can do a lot of recycled materials when it comes to starting seeds. I personally like some of the trays or flats that I can use. I start lots of seeds. It's sort of an obsession with me. So I like what I call a 20-row flat. And that's all the way to the right, middle picture, where you have 20 opportunities to have seeds in that tray. That's what I personally use. Once the seeds come up, they have true leaves, they get transplanted out of there. Then I move them to the cell packs. The other thing that a lot of people are used to using is the clear plastic domes. It's great to use those domes if you want to hold in extra moisture, but it's also important to remove them maybe once a day and allow fresh air to come in. The other part of it is you have to remove them once those seeds start to come up. And so go ahead and use them. Just be careful with them because you can start a lot of disease in those trays just from the usage and not allowing fresh air to come in. And once again, important, so important, start with clean containers. Whether they're new containers or they're used, if they are used, you might consider using a 10% bleach, Lysol, or something to clean them up and disinfect them. Because if you've used the containers before, diseases can carry over on those pots very easily. A potting medium, we want to try to use a potting mix instead of a potting soil. A potting mix is a peat moss based formula that has vermiculite or perlite, and sometimes it has a pH neutralizing agent in it. And the other thing that it has is a wetting agent. Whereas a potting soil is somebody's soil they've dug up, put some styrofoam in, maybe some sand, they've bagged it, and then you're buying it for a really cheap price. You get what you pay for. So I really try to encourage people to use potting mix, or you can find a seed starting mix. I don't recommend for seed starting that it should have any fertilizer in it. And that can be a challenge this time of year when all these box stores and retailers are starting to get their soil supplies in. A lot of those potting mixes already have fertilizer in them. A lot of them already have moisture crystals in them. For seed starting, you don't want that. You just want pure potting mix, no fertilizer, or seed starting mix. That's what you're needing. And once again, don't be cheap about the soil, because poor quality just causes a lot of problems. When you are mixing your soil, I always try to get a big tub, put my soil in it, and I add moisture to it, and I mix it to where the moisture is evenly distributed. Then I will pick that soil up with my hand, squeeze it. If you're wringing water out of it, it's too wet. You need to add more dry soil to it. If you squeeze it and it just slightly clumps and you can feel moisture in it, then that's the right consistency. And the moisture consistency is important because you don't want to waste your soil or your potting mix, because too much moisture can cause you too much soil to go in a pot. But you don't want it too much on the dry side, because then it won't take up the water like it should. Think about temperature. The seeds need to be warm. I always try to use lights and heat mats, and that provides quite a bit of warmth. If you're going to light them, try to get new fluorescent bulbs. You can use grow bulbs, but as long as you use new fluorescent bulbs, usually you have a pretty good light spectrum, and you don't need more than that. No further away than 2 inches is what we want those lights. Closer is fine. Further away is not so much fine. And moisture, water's what's going to make or break the seedlings. Allow them to dry out a little, but don't let them wilt. But on the flip side, don't keep them consistently wet, mainly because they'll start getting fungal diseases, and then you'll start having damping off, and that's just not a good situation. All seeds are not consistently growing at the same temperature. Just keep that in mind. And that's where these books and going and researching will come in handy, because everything's at a different temperature. For example, you don't want to use bottom heat on any of the broccoli, cabbage, spinach, lettuce, because they won't come up as well. They don't like warm soils. Whereas with the tomatoes and peppers, you're going to need the warmer soils. And this chart at the bottom just gives you an idea of how different the temperatures can be for seed starting. Just keep in mind, you can sow seeds different ways. You can broadcast it in flats or containers. You can put them in individual cell pack holes. I like the row method, and mainly because I can get a lot of seeds, but also diseases don't tend to go across the flat when you're using rows. It will follow only the row. So just keep that in mind. And depth does count. You don't want to go too deep, and you don't want to go too shallow. Read the seed packet or read the seed catalogs and find out how deep those seeds need to be. Seedling care, basically make sure that dome is removed. Stagnant air equals poor growth. So basically give it quite a bit of good fresh air. I even sometimes put an oscillating fan in front of my seedlings just to give it that extra air. Thin if needed, because you don't want more than 1 or 2 seedlings coming up in a cell pack. Fertilize only after the true leaves. Transplant only after the true leaves appear. And then, of course, harden off after you've grown them and they're at a point where you want to transplant them out into the garden. Just make sure to harden them off for about a week or 2 before transplanting.